All right. Let's see. Oh, that's a big stretch. All right. We are back to reading my favorite book. This is Under the Oak Tree. Oh, hold on. All right. So this is Under the Oak Tree, and it is by Suji Kim. We got the front of the book. We got the back of the book. I have already read chapter 1, and it should be posted in my VODs on Twitch, and it will be posted to YouTube, unfortunately, in January. I'm a little bit behind on getting things posted over to YouTube. So, Olive. Hold on, I have a reading buddy who would like to join me. Come here. Come here. All right. There. Hi, sweetheart. Yeah. Hi, sweetheart. Okay. So, I'm going to go ahead and read the back of this. If you missed chapter 1, again, it's going to be on my Twitch VODs, and it will eventually be transferred over to my YouTube VODs or my YouTube videos, so that way it will be there permanently, because everything on Twitch eventually gets deleted. This is my favorite novel. It's called Under the Oak Tree. It's by Suji Kim. I'm going to go ahead and read the back, and then I'm also going to go ahead and read the warning that it has, because there is a warning for this book. Most fairy tales end with a wedding and a happily ever after, but this is no fairy tale. Lady Maximilian is the daughter of the powerful Duke Croyso, but she is rarely allowed outside her family's sprawling castle for fear that her stutter will tarnish their noble name. When she is forced to marry Sir Riftan, a lowborn knight caught in one of her father's schemes, Maxi doesn't dare hope for happiness, let alone love. Her stumbling communication and his gruff manner sour their relationship before it can begin, and Riftan leaves without a word the morning after their vows are exchanged. Now, 3 years after their disastrous wedding night, Riftan has returned as a war hero. To Maxi's surprise, despite rumors that he was offered marriage to Princess Agnes, a beautiful and renowned sorceress, Riftan still wants Maxi for his wife. And when he comes to claim her, his desire bewilders Maxi, even as she is overcome by the scorching heat that Riftan's presence ignites within her. As she learns to navigate the intricacies of her new life, Maxi will find herself and her courage and discover that she is anything but powerless. Yes, right? Hi, Muffin. How are you? I don't know if did you hear like the whole beginning of I read books on here. This is the second book that I've ever read on here. This is literally my favorite book. Okay, so this is my favorite book. It is called Under the Oak Tree. It's by Suji Kim. They also have a webtoon comic on Manta for it. I've already read chapter 1. That is posted in my VODs on Twitch, and it will eventually be posted into my YouTube. And this is my reading buddy. This is Olive. Hi. So I'm going to be starting on chapter 2. There should have already been a warning, but there's also a warning that's in this book. Hold on. I'm going to snooze this ad because I definitely need to get this. Yeah, she's absolutely cute. She's currently in heat, though. She needs to get in and get spayed. Okay. There is a warning. I will be reading it every single time that I start. Yeah. Every single time that I start reading a chapter on here, because there is some stuff in this book. Some stuff. We're not, yeah. You'll see. This is a note from Suji Kim. To my readers, this story grapples with many difficult and complex themes. The content includes depictions of physical and mental abuse, as well as themes of trauma and emotional distress experienced by the characters. Certain scenes may be disturbing and triggering for some readers. Reader discretion is advised. The story also contains explicit sexual content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please approach this content with care and seek support if needed. For any readers who see themselves in this tale, my hope is that it provides you with the comfort, courage, and the knowledge that you are not alone. Okay, Olive. Holy crap. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to skip forward to chapter 2. Yes, dear. Yes, dear. I know. I love you, Olive. Okay. This is really difficult with her here. She keeps trying to rub on the book. All right. Again, Under the Oak Tree by Suji Kim. This is novel 1. And we're going to start with chapter 2. With the fall of the Roman Empire, conqueror of the western kingdoms, and whose rule once reached the southern continent, came the Age of Lords. The empire was split into 7 kingdoms: Wedden, Balto, Dristan, Osiria, Sycan, Eryx, and Livadon. Kings sought the loyalty of their vassals so that they would protect their territories, and vassal lords strove to bolster their armies with powerful knights and sorcerers in ever-increasing numbers. Duke Croyso, Maxi's father, was one such lord. His ancestor, the first Duke of Croyso, had been one of the lords of Wedon, who successfully seized the vast eastern territories. Over the generations, the Dukes of Croyso joined dozens of wars to secure fertile lands and tens of thousands of serfs, allowing them to garner immense wealth and power. But 30 years ago, the 7 kingdoms signed an armistice, for growing numbers of monsters had started to flood the land. As part of the agreement, Duke Croyso was pressured to return his annexed eastern territories back to Dristan. Unwilling to relinquish half of his dukedom, Duke Croyso quickly devised a solution. He would strengthen the legitimacy of his rule by marrying a princess of the old Roman Empire. In this, he succeeded. Duke Croyso found and married Aryan Rome Gertha, a maiden descended from Rome's fallen royalty, and Maxi's mother. Aryan was a beautiful and virtuous woman, dutiful and docile, but above all, she was a scion of the great house of Rome, which had once ruled all the land under the sun. With Aryan as his wife, the Duke nearly extricated himself from all territorial disputes, much to his satisfaction. However, it was not long before he encountered that age-old problem faced by all noblemen, the matter of succession. Like all other lords, Duke Croyso longed for an heir who would inherit his titles, his vast lands, and his castle. Yet even after 6 years of marriage, Aryan had failed to bear him a child. Every pregnancy ended in miscarriage. The Duke devoted all of his efforts to securing a healthy heir, and he tried everything. From enlisting the help of high-ranking clerics to seeking out sorcerers, he did it all. But his struggle yielded nothing but frustration until a decade later, when God finally answered his prayers and a healthy child was born. Unfortunately, this child was a girl. His hopes dashed. Duke Croyso became despondent, and by the time the girl was 2 or 3 years old, a violent rage had taken roots within him. The girl was not only utterly useless, but she also had a stutter. He abandoned what little expectations he had for his daughter. He had hoped to marry her off to a prince of Wedon to secure an heir from their union, but he would never allow a child with an impediment to succeed him. It was his firm belief that only a perfect, healthy male child could bear the honor of the Croyso name and legacy. Aryan died without giving birth to a male heir. Repeated cycles of pregnancy and miscarriages had drained the life out of her. Needing an heir who carried the royal blood of the Roman imperial family, Duke Croyso wasted no time in marrying one of Aryan's cousins. To his dismay, his second wife soon died of an illness, and she, too, left only a daughter behind. As rumors spread that House Croyso was cursed, no other members of the Roman imperial bloodline would agree to marry their daughters to the Duke. He had no choice but to pin all of his remaining hopes on his second daughter, Rosetta. Unlike her older sister, Rosetta was beautiful, intelligent, and exceedingly talented. If he could secure an heir by marrying her off to the son of a prestigious family, he would be able to preserve the pedigree of his house and maintain the rule over his vast territory. To that end, Duke Croyso spared no expense. The most distinguished tutors, hundreds of servants, dazzling clothes, sparkling jewels, anything Rosetta wished for, he gave her. The Duke did everything in his power to make sure that she was the most desirable bride in Wedden. As for his useless daughter, Maximilian, he wasted no time on her. She was the least of his priorities. In fact, Maxi would have been better off if her father had forgotten that she existed at all. After Rosetta was born, the Duke began to see his eldest daughter as a thorn in his side. Most nobles were averse to uniting with a family that had produced flawed offspring. Some went so far as to avoid such families altogether, believing that their blood carried bad luck. If it became widely known that Duke Croyso's eldest daughter had a severe speech impediment, many suitors might shy away from taking Rosetta's hand in marriage, no matter how perfect of a bride that she was. Without advantageous marriage for Rosetta, his plans for future political alliances would lie in ruins. Such thoughts worried the Duke to no end, as he did not want his eldest daughter's condition to block his path to power. He wished a plague or illness would claim his firstborn, who had given him his first taste of failure. Not only had she brought shame upon him, but his useless excuse of a daughter could also destroy the family's future. The taller that Maxi grew, the more intense her father's anger became, and she bore the brunt of his unmitigated rage. In the name of teaching her manners, he lashed her day after day until her flesh was covered in blisters. Whips tore open the skin on her back whenever she made the terrible mistake of being noticed by outsiders. The Duke never forgave even the smallest of errors. He saw her flaws as a threat to his house. He felt assured that he could beat her imperfections out of her. To him, everything was Maximilian's fault. It was her fault that she had emerged from her mother's womb as an imbecile, and it's her fault that the Croyso family's reputation was threatened. He merely treated her the way that she deserved. No amount of scolding or lashings could correct her imperfections, and for this she was blamed. She was a mistake, a good-for-nothing miscreant, who should never have been born. Such words were hammered into her ears like crooked nails as she grew. The Croyso stumbling block, a disgrace to our house, foolish, unsightly girl, no better than a rodent. Faced with her father's unforgiving blows and under his contemptuous gaze, she shriveled like a dried leaf. She resigned herself to living out the rest of her days as the unwanted daughter, the shameful fool, the despicable Maximilian. Maxi, are you all right? Firm hands shook her awake. A pair of black eyes gazed intently into hers. Still in a daze, she blinked, not comprehending what had happened. Riftan gently brushed back the strands of hair that were stuck to her forehead, and the quiet intimacy of the gesture brought her back to her senses. She sprang up. Where am I? An inn, in a village, near Zeno. Do you not remember? An ogre attacked the carriage, and we left the woods while you were still unconscious. Riftan placed a large pillow behind her back. As she sank into its warm embrace, she looked at him, her mind bursting with questions. He took a bowl from the table, filled it with water, and handed it to her. Drink. You've been sweating. You need to rehydrate. Maxi did not take the bowl, but only stared blankly at the rippling water. Riftan frowned. I didn't poison it, if that's what you're thinking. Drink. Hesitantly, she accepted the bowl and brought it to her lips. As the lukewarm water filled her stomach, her insides churned again. She lowered the bowl with a grimace. Riftan raised an eyebrow. Do you still feel unwell? No. Tell me if you're still in pain. I'll call for the cleric. No, I feel better. After observing her with narrowed eyes, Riften took the bowl and walked to the table to set it back down. Only then did Maxi have an opportunity to study the room. It was shabby, its floors and walls made of wood, and its only furniture a bed, a table, and a few chairs. When she examined the ceiling for spiders, she noticed a silken web in one corner that glinted in the dim light. The clean bed was the room's only saving grace. She had just finished sniffing the blanket for mold when she frowned in suspicion. Hoping that she was wrong, she slipped a hand under the blanket. Bare skin. She was wearing nothing but a man's tunic. Her undergarments were nowhere to be found. My clothes! Where? Riften glanced up from rearranging the towel and water bowl. He answered her matter-of-factly as if nothing was out of the ordinary. I undressed you because your clothes were covered with vomit. That's my tunic you're wearing. You didn't bring a single piece of clothing with you, so we had to make do with something of mine. Maxi opened and closed her mouth like a carp. Should she be astonished that he was blaming her for not bringing spare clothes after he had given her no time to pack? Or should she be more shocked by the fact that he had undressed her while she was unconscious? When she did not speak, Riften did. You've been unconscious all day. I'll order something for you to eat. Oh, wait. But Riften had already turned and left the room without a sign of guilt on his face. Maxi quickly scanned the room for something to wear, but all she could find was Riften's armor piled up haphazardly next to the bed. Nothing in the room resembled a suitcase. She resorted to pulling the blanket up over her nose. Soon, Riften returned. When his eyes landed on the top of Maxi's head, peeking out from under the blanket like a turtle's from its shell, he frowned. There's no use hiding now. I already saw everything when I was cleaning you up. Cleaning me up? Riften twisted his lips cynically in response to Maxi's question. As I've told you many times, you are my wife. We've already lain together, albeit 3 years ago. What's there to be ashamed about? An intense flush washed over Maxi's body, turning her beet red from head to toe. Clearly irritated by her distress, Riften's face darkened. All I did was change your clothes, but you're acting like I violated you. You shouldn't have fainted if you didn't want me to touch you. Maxi flinched as he began a tirade about fragile noblewomen who faint at the drop of a hat. Her eyes glistened with tears as she whispered a quiet apology. I'm sorry. Riften clenched his mouth shut and left the room, and Maxi lowered her head in shame. It had been less than a day since Riften's return, yet she had already angered him countless times. Was it really wise for her to follow him to his estate? She bit her lip, her heart heavy with anxiety. He thought of her as his wife now, but he could change his mind at any moment. Hi, Ninetails. It was only a matter of time. Even now, it was clear that he disliked her, and he was bound to treat her with cruelty, once he realized how useless she was. As a distinguished knight whose name was known throughout the continent, Riften would find himself invited to countless festivities and banquets. Maxi knew better than anyone that she was not a wife he could proudly bring along. She was not worth showing off, and before long, Riften would realize that too and start abusing her. Would she be better off returning to Croyso Castle sooner rather than later? If she begged, would her father show her mercy? Maxi pictured Riften standing with a sword in his hand. It had taken him only a single swing to have a monster 3 times his size. A whipping at his hands would cause her unthinkable harm. But so far, he hasn't struck me even once. She creased her brows at this sudden realization. He hasn't raised a hand against her, even when he was consumed by anger. Perhaps he was not as vicious as her father. But before this hope could bud and blossom, she crushed and flattened it. They had only just reunited, and there was no telling how their relationship would unfold. She was still deep in thought when the door rattled open. Riften walked into the room, a tray of steaming soup and bread in his hands. Vegetable soup and barley bread. He set the tray on the bedside shelf. Eat some before you sleep. We leave at sunrise. Maxi blinked, confused by what she was seeing. Riftan had stormed out just moments ago, yet here he was bringing her food as if nothing had happened. He was truly unpredictable. He placed a wooden spoon and the bowl of soup in her hands. What are you waiting for? Eat while it's still warm. Thank you. She stirred the soup and scooped up a spoonful, blowing on it before bringing it to her lips. It was hot, but not hot enough to scald her tongue. And though she had no appetite, a few mouthfuls of the savory soup did help to settle her stomach. She stole a furtive look at Riftan while she returned to stirring the contents of the bowl. He had dragged a chair next to the bed and was polishing his sword. Without his armor, and with his long legs resting languidly, he looked 2 or 3 years younger than he really was. Why aren't you eating? Did he have eyes in the back of his head? Maxi blushed, embarrassed that he had caught her staring. I just wanted to ask. Her stirring became listless, and he turned to look at her as she continued. I have nothing to change into. It's late. I'll buy you new clothes tomorrow. What about my old clothes? I asked the maidservants at this inn to wash them. Riftan studied his reflection in the blade of his sword. Maxi hesitated for a long time before opening her mouth again. May I at least have my undergarments back? To Maxi's surprise, a deep blush spread across Riftan's cheeks. He kneaded his face roughly before reassumed his nonchalance. They were torn. I had to throw them away. Pardon? They ripped when I was taking them off, so I threw them away. Maxi flinched at his brusque tone. She continued to press him. Why would you take my undergarments off? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He began to mumble a reply, his eyes avoiding hers. Suddenly, he glared at Maxi, and she clutched the blanket like a shield. I had no choice. You couldn't breathe, and your face was turning blue. Those dreadful undergarments of yours were just about strangling you, so I tried to loosen the straps. All I did was pull at the knot. How the hell was I supposed to know that the skirt was sewn onto the bodice? Maxi's cheeks burned, and her scalp felt as though she might soon give off steam. Knowing that he had seen her undergarments, she wanted to sink down into the ground. Her nursemaid had forced her into those undergarments, convinced that they would help her win her husband's affection. She had to put on the dreadful thing at her nursemaid's stubborn insistence, but she never imagined that Riftan would see them. She buried her face into her hands, resisting the impulse to throw herself out the window. Riftan sighed. Don't make that face. I'll get you new undergarments tomorrow. Would you like to borrow mine for now? She shook her head. No, there's no need. Maxi did not have the faintest desire to wear undergarments that belonged to someone else, let alone ones that belonged to him. But at the same time, she felt uneasy wearing nothing but a loose tunic. She returned to fiddling with her spoon, and she tried to read his face. This only made him stare back at her, his brow creased with frustration. Are you going to stir your soup all night? Eat up. You haven't even touched the bread. She shoveled a few spoonfuls of the soup into her mouth. She usually ate like a bird, though, and there was still a mild discomfort in her belly. Unsure that she could stomach the coarse bread, she took only a few more sips of the soup before lowering her bowl. You didn't even finish half of it. I have no appetite. Don't be picky. You won't get anything extravagant until we reach my estate. Eat. Even if the taste doesn't agree with you, how else will you endure the journey? He scolded her as if she were an ill-mannered child, and she blushed. Do you plan to trouble us all by starving yourself and fainting throughout the entire journey? I'll eat. Maxi forced down a few more spoonfuls, but she had to stop when her stomach churned in protest. Riftan frowned when she sat down the spoon, but he did not insist further. He took the tray from her with a sigh. Satisfying the noble lady's palate. I can already tell it's going to be a pain. He turned away, clucking his tongue, and Maxi hunched her shoulders in an attempt to make herself smaller. His mood changed like the wind. He had kindly brought her supper only to burst into sour agitation again. She could not adapt fast enough. Am I that much of a nuisance to him? He must secretly regret bringing me along. Why did he make me come with him? Maxi had been treading cautiously, but she could no longer suppress her curiosity. Why are you taking me with you? What? Riftan stopped in his tracks. He had been walking towards the door with the tray in his hands, but now he turned to examine her. What do you mean? No, you didn't. No, you didn't marry me, but because you wanted to. So I don't know why you're taking me with you. His face hardened. She held her breath, unsure if it had been her stutter or the question that displeased him. She continued, her words stumbling over her trepidation. What I mean to say is, we don't know each other well enough to be man and wife. A man like you doesn't have to take me. You could have any woman. Shut your mouth. Riftan stomped back to her bed and slammed the tray down, his eyes smoldering with anger. If you don't want to come with me, just say so. No, that's not what I... Don't try to fool me. My castle may not be as large as Croyso Castle, but it's more than enough to house a small woman like you. I have gold if gold is what you want. You'll continue to live in luxury, damn it. So enough of your nonsense. She shrank back like a frightened tortoise. Why did he think luxury was her greatest concern? She tried to rebuke him, but gesturing frantically with her hands. That's not what I'm worried about. I just wondering why you're taking me. You're my wife. Our marriage is recognized by the church. Do I need any other reason to take you home? You're the one who remained in your father's castle even after our wedding. If you want a divorce... What? He grabbed her shoulders. Maxi's body went numb, her strength evaporating in the wake of his rage-filled voice. She was like a mouse before a hissing serpent. Perhaps he really would strike her this time. She clenched her eyes shut in terror, bracing herself for a blow that never came. Maxi cracked her eyes open, and a pair of black eyes stared back, gleaming with cold wrath. The hands on her shoulders trembled, as if they could barely contain their anger. Divorce? Are you saying that you want a divorce? No, that's not what I... What is it then? Is there another man? Unable to make sense of Riftan's words, Maxi could do nothing but bear the blaze in his eyes. He closed in on her, spitting his words through clenched teeth. Were you with another man while I was off fighting for my life? No, her voice faltered. His grip loosened, but his face remained contorted with suspicion. Then why do you mention divorce? Everyone said that when you came back, you would divorce me and marry the princess. So, princess? He asked sharply, understanding finally drawing on his face. Maxi nodded, holding back tears. A stream of curses poured out from Riftan's lips, and he ran a hand through his hair. Blighted fools wagging their useless tongues. He scooped her up into his arms, blanket and all, and sat down on the bed. Ignoring Maxi's flailing legs, he placed her on his knees and cupped her face with his hands. Before she knew it, his tongue was lapping up the tears from the corners of her eyes. His warm breath trickled her cheeks and lips, distracting her enough to stop weeping. Riftan wrapped an arm around her waist and let out a deep sigh. I don't know what silly rumors you've heard, but I turned down that proposal a long time ago. You turned it down? Maxi's eyes widened with disbelief. Of course I did. Why would I accept such a deranged offer? Deranged? Why would he think it was madness to offer a princess's hand to the hero who had saved the world? I thought the king had finally lost his mind. How could he make such an offer to a married man? But what? We swore a sacred vow before God. I'll castrate any bastard who dares break the holy vows of matrimony with my own 2 hands. Did you think me a disloyal scoundrel? Maxi gave him an incredulous look. Was he being sincere? She was well aware that knights prized honor and loyalty, but Riftan seemed to have an almost religious devotion to his ideals. He was perhaps chivalrous to a fault, but how could he choose a forced marriage over an opportunity to marry into royalty? Glory, titles of nobility, and an unimaginably large dowry could have all been his. Furthermore, his child would have had the right to succeed the royal throne. He had dismissed all of that as madness for the sake of a wife that he never wanted. Perhaps he's the mad one. But it finally dawned on Maxi that Riftan regarded their marriage with the utmost sincerity. He was taking her with him, not because of some ulterior motive, but simply because she was his wife. It was exactly as he had told her. But she was overcome with surprise. But, did he truly have no regrets? Perhaps he did not comprehend the opportunity that he had turned down. Forgetting that her current predicament obliged her to cling to him, she blurted out another question. Are you really all right with that? Princess Agnes is very beautiful. Have you met Agnes? She winced. Riftan claimed he rejected the princess, but they were close enough for him to use her first name. Not in person. Then how do you know she's beautiful? I can't stand women who romp around like wild, unbridled stallions. Taken aback by how candidly he spoke about the royal family, Maxi gaped at him. With a thumb, he wiped off what remained of her earlier tears. Forget that ridiculous rumor. Palace life suffocates me, and I don't intend to live out my days in the shadow of a haughty princess. But, enough with the buts. Did you bring up that rumor as an excuse to escape this marriage that you so despise? A threatening glint flashes across his eyes. He relaxed only after Maxi vigorously shook her head. Good. Don't you ever mention such nonsense again. I won't be so patient next time. Maxi nearly rolled her eyes. Patient? He had been shouting all this time. If this was patient, then... Riftan placed his hands on the small of her back, and her thoughts came to a screeching halt. She froze as his hands inched downward, making their way beneath the blanket that covered her. Wait! Maxi kicked her legs in alarm. She was wearing nothing but a thin tunic. Unperturbed, Riftan slid his hand under her buttocks and lifted her slightly. He pulled the blanket out from under her and tossed it to the floor. Maxi frantically pulled the tunic over her legs, but Riftan simply rolled up the tunic's lower half and reached underneath to cup her high-perched breasts. She let out an unceremonious cry as the roughness of his warm hands brushed across her tender skin, sending strange and intense sensations coursing through her body. Wait! Riftan, who had been burying his nose in the nape of her neck, raised his head. He wore a disgruntled look. Is that your favorite word, or have you forgotten your own husband's name? He wore a disgruntled look, and Maxi blinked like a confused owl. As if to chastise her, Riftan pressed his mouth roughly against hers. His lips were surprisingly soft and warm, and for a moment, Maxi wondered how they could be the same lips that uttered such cold, harsh words to her before. Don't look so startled, Riftan said. We weren't married under ordinary circumstances. You said so yourself. But there is little we can do. You must learn to accept me. He combed her hair back with his firm, reassuring fingers, and the tenderness of the gesture surprised her. His lips incessantly explored her cheeks, her temples, her ears, his warm breath tickling her skin. When his muscular thighs twitched beneath her, Maxi instinctively clutched at Riftan's clothes and clenched her eyes shut. She knew what this overture meant. She had experienced it once before, and she remembered the pain that followed. Her body stiffened and Riftan sighed. Try to relax. It'll hurt if you're so tense. But, this isn't our first time. Riftan stopped nibbling on the soft flesh of her throat. His voice grew hesitant. Do you want me to stop? She opened her mouth to reply, but the words failed to take form. She did not have the heart to refuse. He turned down the chance to marry Princess Agnes to honor his vows to Maxi. It would not be right to deny him her bed. After a long pause, she shook her head. Emboldened once more, Riftan wasted no time in kissing her and pushing his tongue deep into her mouth, eager to taste her. Maxi placed a hand on his chest, only to pull it back, startled by how fast his heart was beating. Riftan peppered her chin and jaw with kisses, before sliding his lips down her neck to her collarbone. Hot breath and the wetness of his tongue prickled goose flesh across her skin. Raise your arms. Maxi rigidly obeyed. His calloused palms stroked her from waist to armpits, pulling the tunic over her head. She hugged herself to hide her breasts as Riftan embraced her from behind and planted a kiss on her shoulder. I'll be as gentle as I can. Maxi's vision blurred. She could feel his eyes greedily devouring the sight of her exposed flesh. Round breasts and a flat midriff, a pale pair of thighs, and that tender region between them. She shut her eyes in shame at the sight of her nakedness, but closing her eyes only amplified the sensation of his fingers stroking her nipples. When Riftan's mouth left her collarbone and moved down to her breasts with the heated, hungry need, Maxi gasped as he began to suck. His lips delicately grazed her skin as the tip of his tongue roved around her hardened nipples. Teeth nibbled her flesh, stopping just short of causing pain, but sending a pleasant tingle from her neck to her ears. Hey, wait! Riftan. He sucked hard as if to punish her. Maxi uttered a small, weak cry. Not knowing what to do with her hands, she tore at his clothes. Riftan gently loosened her hands and draped her arms over his shoulders. Her insides quivered at the touch of his warm skin, at the tickle of his sleek hair brushing against her neck. Say my name. Say it. His command was firm but gentle. Riftan. She called his name, her voice shaky. A shiver passed through his shoulders. He muttered something unintelligible, almost guttural, before overwhelming her with a wild flurry of kisses. His powerful arms tightened around her waist with such strength that Maxi feared she might snap in half. A passion that she had never experienced before overcame her, and she clung to his neck, panting. With his lips on hers, Riftan chuckled. That's it. Hold on to me, as tightly as you need. For the first time, he smiled at her. He rained kisses on her, one hand on the back of her head, while his other hand drew a few slow circles around her navel before sliding down and pushing between her legs. Maxi clamped her tight thighs together, but it was too late. His hand had already settled into her tender flesh. The slow movement of his fingers bloomed an aching heat deep within her, and Maxi jolted, startled by this sensation. You're beautiful. Riftan whispered as he admired the flush in her cheeks. His face had changed remarkably from before. His piercing eyes had softened, and the hard corners of his lips were curved into a boyish smile. As his ravenous mouth covered hers, his fingers touched her delicately, like a bard playing a lute. Maxi's ears turned red at the wet sounds emerging from her body. Odd sensations simmered inside her, and she quivered uncontrollably, her toes curling. She instinctively tried to escape Riftan's touch, but he only pursued her more insistently. Ah! Maxi cried out as a flash of sweet lightning shot from her lower belly to the top of her head. She held on tightly to Riftan's shoulders. His thick chest rumbled with laughter. Does this feel good? No, it doesn't. She was suddenly afraid. The flush in her face had spread down to her chest, and she did not recognize the strange sounds coming from her own mouth. Her limbs seemed to melt, and she buried her face in his shoulder to stifle her moans. Riftan's uncompromising attention on that most intimate part created an unbearable heat within her. Stop! Ah! Maxi whimpered and panted as her insides threatened to dissolve. It's all right. Just let yourself feel. He ignored her pleas and continued with his torturous caress. What am I supposed to feel? Maxi's lips quivered as Riftan's hand began to move faster. Something down below bubbled and erupted, sending tremors throughout her body. She moaned, thrashing for release, and he drew her in closer. Trembling helplessly, Maxi rubbed her forehead against Riftan's neck. Her body writhed and her legs shook, the drum of his quickened heartbeat pounding against her skin. Like a man dying of thirst, he drank in the air with quick, erratic gulps. This was all I could think about while I was in that living hell. The feel of your body, of you melting in my arms. I've wanted this for so long. He hungrily sucked on her lips and returned his fingers to the swollen place between her thighs. Maxi whimpered and shook her head, but there was no escaping the flood of overwhelming sensations. Riftan's tongue traced a damp path around her ear as his wet fingers pushed inside of her. He encroached upon her body, and with her most delicate muscles contracted at his touch, Riftan breathed a low growl into her ear. Do you know how soft and warm you are down here? His fingers inched outward before thrusting deep inside. The friction brought forth a mild discomfort, but it was not as painful as Maxi remembered. Was her memory of that first night all wrong? She had never felt a sensation so intense, tender, and warm. As Riftan's fingers slid in deeper, his thumb continued apace, rolling over her most sensitive nub of flesh. The back of her neck tingled. Panting, Maxi tried to get used to this new and consuming sensation. She felt different, as if she were in a completely different world. Just yesterday, she thought Riftan was a frightening man and doubted that she could ever become comfortable with him. Now she was clinging to his neck and allowing him to touch her all over. It was incredibly surreal, but not disagreeable. Loosen up a little, Riftan murmured. It hurts. Relax. You must relax so it won't hurt when I enter you. The shock of his words did not last for long. As his fingers moved slowly inside of her, Maxi's mind went blank. Her legs trembled. She panted breathlessly. Riftan planted kisses on her forehead, temples, and eyelids, and whispered with unrestrained passion. I'll tell you what to do. Trust me and relax. Maxi shook her head, her thoughts failing to keep pace. He gently stroked her hair and pushed his fingers in deeper. A quiet moan escaped her lips. I can't. Don't know how. Breathe out. Relax your body slowly. She exhaled, long and slow and gradually. Her body relaxed. He kissed her cheeks as if to praise her and stroked the length of her back. Now try to tighten this part. Riftan showed her where she should squeeze by pressing and rubbing. Somehow, knowing exactly what to do, her body tightened and closed around his fingers. He laughed again. You're driving me mad. No. That was a compliment. Relax again. Yes, just like that. As she loosened her body, his long, deft fingers entered her once more. When he began to slide out, she squeezed again, as if trying to keep him tightly within. How long had Riftan been groaning? He grunted as though he were in pain, then muttered something inaudible. Maxi's body began to contract and relax on its own. Even as a pulsing heat coursed through her veins, her legs writhed and her waist tensed, and her thighs began to shake uncontrollably. And then another eruption deep within her pelvis. She pressed her face into his shoulder, waiting for the overpowering sensation to pass. Something trickled down her legs. Shh, you were so good, Riftan whispered as he laid her flat on the bed. Still riding the high of her climax, Maxi sank limply into the blankets. Riftan nimbly pulled his clothes over his head and climbed onto the bed. It was not the first time she had seen his naked body. Still, the way he glowed sensually in the darkness caused her heart to flutter, and she realized anew just how beautiful he was. Hold on to me, he said as he lay on top of her. Something hot and hard pushed itself between her thighs. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and Riftan's body, radiating heat, weighed down on her in a curiously pleasant way. Strange. Were they really doing what they had done 3 years ago? The feeling of him slowly filling her was somewhat uncomfortable, but it was not as painful as she remembered. Just a little more, Riftan murmured as he stroked her hair. The flicker of the nearby lamp cast shadows over his face. A droplet of sweat trickled down his forehead and along his cheeks before stopping at his chin. Maxi reached her hand to his face and touched his smooth golden skin, sending tremors through his frame. Ah! Riftan moaned, pleased by her touch. When he lowered himself, Maxi squirmed against the sudden pressure and locked her legs around his hips. A pained whimper escaped him. "Don't squeeze too tight." "I'm sorry." She gazed at him with wet eyes. They were pressed together like two lumps of clay, and each rhythmic movement kneaded and remolded her. How was it possible to feel someone so intimately? Ragged breaths, quickened heartbeats, feverish bodies, shaped into one like this? Their bodies were indistinguishable. "It feels so good." Riftan moaned and drew her closer into his arms. Sweat dripped from his heated skin onto her breasts. Maxi looked up at his hardened face. He was holding back most of his moans, his brow furrowed and his features etched with pain. "You really feel good?" Riftan broke into a smile at her expression of doubt. "Why else would I lie here with a woman who fainted earlier today?" With that, he tightened his grip on her hips and moved his lower body in urgent need. His hot flesh pulsed deep inside of her, drawing whimpers from her throat. Each time he exited and pushed slowly back in, Maxi's body responded in rhythm. Riftan panted, muttering hoarsely between each gasp. "I hadn't planned to take you like this, like an animal. I wanted to let you rest. But that undergarment of yours. Ah!" His firm abdomen pressed against hers. Maxi's fingers left scratches on his back. I tried to hold back, but..." Maxi could no longer hear what he was saying. His movements became so irregular that she completely lost the rhythm. Should she relax now or tighten? Unable to match his motions, her body spasmed. Just as she thought she could not bear it any longer, Riftan began to gather speed. Maxi's legs shook. "Maxi." Riftan's large hands cupped her cheeks. She squinted at him. Why is he saying my name like that? The longing on his face confused her. He was close, so very close, and pressed his mouth hungrily to hers. His body, which had been bucking like a stallion, stiffened suddenly. There was nothing left to take, yet he seemed to thirst for more. The thing that filled her swelled, and with a pulse, it spewed forth something warm and wet. "Ah!" Maxi gasped a moan. She wound her arms around his sweat-slicked back as his breath fogged between them. He collapsed on top of her, his heart pounding out of his chest. "Damn it, I didn't want to be rough this time." As Riftan caught his breath, Maxi gazed at him through heavy eyelids. His dark eyes, still smoldering, gleamed in the glow of the lamp. Remaining inside of her, he brushed feathery kisses across her shoulders and throat. "Did it hurt?" Riftan asked. It had burned a little between her legs, but Maxi shook her head. He sighed in relief and kissed her temple. The intimate gesture made her heart swell. She hadn't expected to feel this way. Maxi had anticipated pain and the bitter emptiness and shame, but none of that materialized. "Am I crushing you?" "One moment." Riftan lifted himself and slowly withdrew from her. Something viscous trickled out after him, and Maxi reflexively recoiled, drawing her legs together. Riftan firmly stopped her. Riftan! "Stay still. You must be tired. Let me clean you." Riftan pulled the wash basin towards him and wrung out a wet towel before bringing it between her legs. With the cold towel, he gently wiped the junction of her thighs. "Are you sure it doesn't hurt?" It doesn't." Pain was the least of her problems. She had turned beet red. Riftan seemed not to notice, and he finished carefully, cleaning her groin before moving on to his own. She avoided his eyes, snatching up the blanket and quickly covering herself. "You'll get used to it soon enough." Riftan said with an amused snort. When he finished washing, Riftan threw himself down next to her, and Maxi squeezed her legs together in alarm. Unperturbed, Riftan moved to the center of the spacious bed and pulled her to his side with surprising grace. Pressed so close to his slick body, she squirmed. Riftan, if you keep squirming like that, I'll assume you haven't had enough. It was not an empty threat. She felt him swelling against her lower belly and froze. Riftan nonchalantly slid an arm under her head and drew her closer, pulling the blanket over their bodies as he did. He slid his fingers through her hair and closed his eyes. Did he intend to sleep next to her? Riftan? What's the matter? He acted as if sleeping together in the nude was the natural thing to do. Not knowing where to look, Maxi swallowed what she had wanted to say and managed only hesitant whisper, Good night. Riftan gave no reply as she watched the fluttering pulse in his muscular neck. Maxi drifted off to sleep. All right, I'm going to go refill my water real quick because my throat feels dry. We've got quite a few pages left, actually. Quite a few pages left. Holy crap. There we go. I will be right back. Just going to refill my drink. Okay. Go ahead and put this back on. I'm going to go back over to here. All right. Let's continue. Maxi awoke to something pressing down on her chest. Feeling suffocated, she blinked her eyes open, only to find that a tanned, muscular arm completely blocked her vision. She raised her head slightly. Riftan was fast asleep, his head buried in her hair. Memories of the previous night came rushing back and she blushed. Under the blanket, they were tangled in a naked embrace, his long and sturdy legs intertwined with hers. He hugged her tight, like he might a favorite pillow. Maxi had never known such an affectionate embrace. Not even her own mother had held her with such warmth. As her eyes roamed uneasily around the room, it occurred to her that she should find something to wear before he woke up. If he found her like this, he might... Burying her face in her hands, she recalled how she had writhed in his arms. How could she face him again? She would rather throw herself out the window. A proper lady would never have acted the way she had. Her nursemaid had made things crystal clear. She was to stay as still as a corpse when submitting to her husband's will. That was her duty as a wife. The heat of shame spread across her cheeks. Far from being corpse-like, Maxi had writhed and moaned. Would he not think her a wanton, unseemly woman? Anxiety washed over her. She could not let him see her like this. After cautiously freeing herself from his arms, she searched under the bed. Dressing like a proper lady might not be possible, but she should at least cover her nakedness. She discovered a tangle of clothes piled on the floor in the corner of the room. She desperately grabbed for them, but they were just out of reach. Not daring to wander about the room naked, she leaned over the edge of the bed with her arm outstretched. But instead of inching forward, she was yanked back. "What are you doing?" Riftan asked, observing her through half-open eyes. Maxi turned to him, surprised. She had thought he was still asleep. When she tried to break free, his arm wrapped around her waist and nimbly rolled her towards him, pinning her under his body. Riftan, it's morning. Yes, it's morning. I was dying, waiting for you to open your eyes. He pressed his lips to her eyelids as he spoke, and she startled under the ticklish sensation. A mischievous smile spread across his face, and he continued to shower her face and ears with light kisses before proceeding to her neck. His lips were like the tickle of a butterfly's wings. Flustered, Maxi pushed his face away. Please, don't. Let me put on some... Do you know how much I had to restrain myself the entire night? He brought her hand to his lips and slipped one of her fingers into his mouth. As his tongue savored her, she blushed to the tips of her ears. Had her hands always been so sensitive? If you knew how I felt every time you blush, Riftan muttered as he nibbled on her fingertips, you would never blush again. Unable to bear the embarrassment, she hid her hands under the blanket. Riftan's brows twitched, and he snatched the blanket away. Why are you trying to hide? Maxi curled up to hide her nakedness. The sun has risen. It's so bright. All the more reason to let me see you. I want to admire you in the light of day. He pulled at her bent legs. She was embarrassed to the point of tears. It was hard to believe she was in bed with a man in broad daylight, when just the day before she had been cowering in her father's castle. Riftan's hand roamed over her shoulders and breasts before gliding down past her waist and settling between her thighs. His fingers slid easily into her where she was still wet from the night before. Maxi, how was last night? It wasn't so bad, was it? Riftan. You felt good, didn't you? She would die of embarrassment before she answered that question. His fingers began to move dexterously in that most intimate of places. For me, it was heaven. Do you know how hard it was for me to leave you 3 years ago? I wanted to throw the dragon campaign to the dogs and stay with you. It was agony for me to rise from your bed, though I knew you must have wanted me gone. Maxi's eyes went round with surprise. The shame of her nudity forgotten, a crooked smile appeared on Riftan's lips, and he grazed the tender skin below her collarbone with his teeth. I still feel the same way. When I'm with you, I can't hold back. He nipped the nape of her neck, and his fingers pushed in deeper. Maxi reflexively squeezed his arm with her thighs, drawing out a satisfied moan from him. It's your bad luck, being married to a man like me. Maxi was convinced that she was the inadequate half in their marriage. Like her father said, this marriage was a great fortune that she did not deserve. Why, then, did Riftan think that she was unlucky? But the question slipped away as her thoughts grew hazy, eclipsed by the heat kindling within her. She panted, squeezing the fingers moving vigorously inside of her. Riftan's feverish gaze surveyed her body from head to toe, and Maxi found herself unable to look away from him. His fingers withdrew and were immediately replaced by the deep thrust of his length. Ah! He let out a savage growl and bit her earlobe. You'll be the death of me, damn it. Maxi clutched tightly onto his iron-hard shoulders, feeling like a prey animal that had been captured by a hound. His grip dug into her thighs, spreading her legs to the very brink of pain, and he started to move steadily. Maxi tried to stifle her moans as Riftan moved with the smooth, gentle cadence of a slow-flowing stream. But before long, he abandoned his restraint and began to move wildly over her and within her. At length, he climaxed and slumped onto her, his body a sweaty heap. She gasped for air, his hot breath brushing her forehead. I could do this for days. You're heavy. If he wanted to, he probably could pin her to the bed for days. Seeing the stricken look on her face, Riftan playfully bit her ears. You taste so good here, too. After nibbling on her reddened earlobe, he dug his tongue into her ear. She shuddered at its wet touch. Riftan! If not for that accursed lizard, I would have bedded you every day and every night. We might have had children of our own by now. No more. Stop. Ah! Ignoring her protest, Riften continued to brush his sweat-slicked body against hers while he teased her ear. Drained from the endless marital duties, Maxi was shocked when Riften shifted himself between her legs again. She almost burst into tears and was considering trying to faint when somebody knocked loudly on the door. Riften froze. "Damn you, what do you want?" "Time to wake up, Commander." The loud yell carried through the door. "The sun is high in the sky. How long are you going to lounge about in bed?" Riften threw a fierce look towards the door, as if he could see through its thick wood. "Didn't I tell you I'd gut you alive if you disturb me again? Do you have a death wish?" Can't you contain yourself until you're back home? We must leave again for the capital as soon as we reach the estate." "Delaying things by a day or two won't be the end of the world. Stop whining." "Commander." "All right, I'm coming. You ruined the mood, you little bastard." Riften ran a hand through his hair, and Maxi stiffened as he spat out a string of creative expletives that she had never heard in her entire life. He sprang up, his features tense with annoyance. "Get the carriage ready. We'll depart soon." In response, the man behind the door stomped away to obey the order. Riften let out a deep sigh and looked down at the floor. "I shouldn't have brought those bastards with me." Maxi watched him silently. "Wait here," Riften said. "I'll find something for you to wear." She nodded, her pale face peeking out from behind the blanket. As Riften gathered his clothes from the floor, he frowned at her. "Why the waterworks?" Maxi did not know how to answer. "Speak. Perhaps you haven't noticed, but I'm not a patient man." How could she not have noticed her husband's red-hot temper? But she could not say that, could she? Your men outside knew," she stammered in a timid voice. "Knew what?" What we were doing in this room." Her cheeks were on fire. Riften had been staring intently at her, but the corners of his mouth suddenly twitched upward. Much to her disbelief, he burst into a boisterous laughter and clutched his stomach. "Riften!" "You really do drive me mad." Almost choking with laughter, he lifted her and the blanket and sat down with her on his lap. For someone with such an intimidating presence, he had an extraordinarily innocent and boyish laugh. His chest still shaking with mirth, he nibbled on her shoulder, which was already dotted with the marks of his passion. "My sweet innocent lady, of course they knew what we did. My men are not half-wits. They know what happens in the bedroom when a husband and wife are reunited after 3 long years." But "It's nothing to be ashamed of. We are married, and that's what married couples do. It's only natural." Natural? She knew the duties that were expected of a wife in the bedchamber, but what she had shared with him last night felt anything but natural. And was shared even the right word? Had it been an act of giving and taking? Her thoughts surprised her. Was it not just a right she had to endure if she was going to bear a child? "You're blushing again." "Tisk. I would have taken you again if it weren't for those pests outside." Maxi shrank away from him. "Don't cover like that. They'll smash the door down if they hear us at it again." He gave her a playful peck on the tip of her nose before setting her back down. Wrapped in the cocoon of her blanket, she rubbed the spot he had kissed and watched as Riften picked up his clothes and began to dress. She quickly averted her eyes, but she seemed unfazed by his own nakedness. In no time at all, Riften was fully clothed, armored, and giving her instructions. "Wait right here," he said as he strapped on his sword. Maxi nodded. She was in no state to leave the room. Her shaking legs would give out if she even tried to stand. When Riften left the room, she crawled to the headboard to crack open the window. Beneath the pale blue autumn sky was a cluster of small villages. Some 5 or 6 wooden cottages stood against the horizon, and unpaved dirt roads, grooved by the carriage wheels, wound through a vast orchard and a sea of scattered meadows. Maxi drank in the pastoral view until she sensed an intense gaze and looked down. 3 knights were gathered by the carriage, parked in front of the inn, and they were staring up at her. Startled, she hurriedly slammed the window shut, She had covered herself with a blanket, but she did not want all of those strange men looking at her disheveled state. Did I delay their departure? She bit her lip. Moments later, someone knocked at the door. Who is it? Maxi called in answer. Water for your morning ablutions, ma'am. Milady. Come in. Still wrapped in her blanket, Maxi sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees. Two maidservants entered with a large wash basin, kettle, and snow-white towel in their hands. They exchanged uneasy looks. We're here at your husband's behest, milady, one said. I can do it myself. He said you would need help. Maxi's face became hot. It's really all right. I will tell my husband. The women didn't insist further. They set the items on the table and quickly exited the room. Maxi waited until their footsteps grew faint before she stood from the bed and locked the door. She then soaked the towel in warm water and began to wash her aching body. The warm water refreshed her, and as she wiped away the sticky layer of sweat and secretions, she noticed the red and purple marks strewn across her shoulders, chest, arms, and legs. Was this how every woman found herself after performing their marital duties? Recalling the previous night, Maxi blushed again. Though she knew that no amount of scrubbing would make the love marks disappear, she rubbed at them furiously with the wet towel. Spending the night with Riftan had been as taxing as it was embarrassing, but she had not felt the same terror as she had 3 years ago. If Maxi was honest with herself, Riftan's embrace, his smile, and gentle kisses had enraptured her in a way that she had never thought possible. Far from finding her inadequate, Riftan truly seemed pleased with her as his wife. He had even said that when he left her on their wedding night, he did so with great reluctance. It felt like a dream. Afraid of the sparks reigniting inside of her, she plunged her head into the wash basin. She washed her tangled hair with soap and dried it with a towel before applying a generous amount of perfumed oil. She had just started combing her hair when there was another knock at the door. My lady, your husband has sent you a change of clothes. Maxi opened the door just enough to receive a dress through the gap. It was rose red and embroidered with gold thread. As she unfolded it, a girdle, a sash, and a thin piece of cloth that resembled an undergarment fluttered to the floor. The undergarment was not that different from the one her nursemaid had given her. She blushed. How had he managed to find such salacious clothing in this backwater? And surely there was some mistake. He did not think that this was her taste in clothing, did he? She covered her face and was whimpering in dismay when another series of knocks interrupted her. This time, it was Riftan. Maxi, he called through the door. Did you get the clothes? Have you changed? Not yet. Hurry, we must leave soon. One moment. At his urging, she hastily put on the flimsy undergarment, feeling no less naked than before. She threw on the white chemise and pulled the extravagant red and gold dress over her head, tugging on the flowy skirt until it grazed her ankles. She was not used to getting dressed without servants to assist her, and though she managed to fasten the bodice, the laces on the back were impossible to reach. She was sighing in frustration, her shoulders cramping from the strain, when Riftan knocked again. Are you dressed again? Oh, what? Could you send someone to help me? Riftan made no reply, so Maxi pressed on. The straps on the back. Open the door. Pardon? Open the door. Maxi slowly opened the door, clutching the dress to prevent it from sliding off. Riftan pushed past her and closed the door behind him. As he appraised her from head to toe, she stammered out an apology. Forgive me for being so slow, but the dress. Don't apologize. I'm not angry, he said, examining her flowing skirt and voluminous sleeves. I don't know much about women's clothes. It didn't occur to me that getting dressed alone could be difficult. An awkward silence followed. Maxi clenched her fingers in the fabric of the dress, deep in self-deprecating thoughts. Do such lavish clothes suit me? Do I not look ridiculous? Without warning, Riftan took her shoulders and turned her around. Let me help you. I... As he laced up the bodice, something about the rustle of the dress put Maxi on edge. After much fumbling, Riftan clearly was unused to handling women's clothes. He spun her around to face him again. All done. Thank you. I bought it from a merchant who happened to be staying nearby. It may not be to your liking, but this is the best I could do. I'll find you something nicer once we're home. Maxi blinked. This dress was more luxurious than anything she had ever worn. Was it not to his liking? Her life hadn't been as extravagant as he imagined. All of Maxi's old dresses had been sewn by the maidservants at Croyso Castle, pieced together from scraps of fabric left over from Rosetta's clothes. Only Rosetta had ever known their father's generosity. Maxi had never worn anything so richly embroidered. That Riftan was concerned she would not find the clothes acceptable disheartened her. Perhaps he was more used to luxury than she had assumed, and perhaps it was a good thing that she hadn't brought her belongings. What a stroke of luck to have avoided the humiliation of putting her shabby wardrobe on display. Pretending to straighten a crease in her skirt, Maxi attempted to speak in a detached manner. This dress isn't so bad. Anxious that she had come across as too haughty, she quickly searched his face, but Riftan displayed no signs of displeasure. As he draped a cloak around her shoulders, he turned her attention to his hands, which carefully fastened the cloak. It was a surreal sight, a knight attending to her most trivial of needs. Riftan helped her into a pair of ankle-high leather shoes and then spoke. Come, let's go. Maxi blushed and nodded. Hand in hand, they stepped out of the room and walked down a wooden staircase. Downstairs, armored knights were milling about a tavern crammed so full of tables and chairs that they had to carefully plan their paths. One of the knights crossed his arms when he saw them. I thought we were going to spend the whole day here, Commander. Are we leaving now? Riftan ignored him and ushered Maxi outside. At the door, another knight approached them and complained loudly. Come now, Commander. We're not going to gobble the lady up. No need to shield her so. Shut your mouth, Riftan said sternly. Haven't I told you to watch your tongue? Maxi looked at the knight with bewilderment. He was a curly-haired young man, tall and well-built. His sharp gaze was completely devoid of friendliness. Behind him stood another knight, this one blonde and equally disapproving as he assessed Maxi. She hid herself behind Riftan, earning herself a loud snort from the blonde man. This is ludicrous, he said. Going so far just for the daughter of the Duke of Croyso? I told you to shut up. Riftan's growl was a clear warning, and the men finally held their tongues. He turned to Maxi and pushed her into the carriage before following her inside. Don't mind them, he reassured her and slammed the carriage door closed. They have no love for your father, but you are no longer a Croyso. You are now Lady Calypso, my wife, and I'll make sure that they never disrespect you again. The daughter of the Duke of Croyso. It was an unpleasant reminder of how their union had come to be. Unable to think of a suitable reply, Maxi fixed her eyes on her knees. Have my men hurt your feelings? Riftan's voice was tinged with concern. She looked up in disbelief. No one had ever bothered to ask about her feelings, yet here he was, eager to address the smallest slight to her. He spoke like a man walking on eggshells. Maxi smiled in spite of herself. You know, Riftan gazed at her, an inscrutable expression on his face. Yes? This is the first time you've smiled at me. As he reached over to caress her cheek, her breath caught in her throat. His lips quivered as if he had something to say. The moment quickly passed. Riftan withdrew his hand and bellowed through the carriage window, pretending nothing had happened. What are you all waiting for? You said we were in a hurry. Someone outside grumbled, and the carriage began to move. In the awkward silence, Maxi stole glances at Riftan. He leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes as if he had forgotten about her presence. The sight calmed her nerves, and soon she found herself following his lead, leaning against the wall. Weary from days of anxiety, Maxi barely noticed the bumps in the road below. She drifted off to sleep as if the carriage and its rattling were a gently rocking cradle. All right. That was the end of chapter 2. So I'm going to continue with chapter 3 another day, probably tomorrow. Once again, that is Under the Oak Tree. It is the first novel, volume 1, and it is by Suji Kim. And I highly recommend getting this book on Amazon if you enjoy it, because this is my favorite book. I had read this as it was like hastily, what's the word I'm looking for? Translated from Korean to English, and I read it on a not so legal site, and it just made me fall in love with it. And I actually had emailed the makers of the Korean edition of the book, and I was begging them. I said, please, please make an English edition and make it a hardback copy. I was so happy when I found out that they were making this, and I am just absolutely in love. It's just beautiful. And this is going to be my favorite book that I'm going to cherish for like the rest of my life. Yeah, so I highly recommend this book. It's like $20 on Amazon. You can get it for like $30 at some other places. Like you can get it for $30 at Barnes and Nobles, $20 at Walmart. There's some other bookstores where it's $30. Fantastic book. Great book to add to your collection. But again, that's going to be it for today's stream. And I will see you guys tomorrow, possibly tomorrow, with some more stream. We'll have to see. I might not be able to stream again until Sunday, but we will see. And that's it. So, Under the Oak Tree, Suji Kim, that was chapter 2.